Welcome back, AWS Networking VPC Firewalls, episode 2.2b, 2b, and it's to be a firewall or not to be a firewall installed. That's what we're going to talk about. Of course, if you haven't checked out the first part of this, where Alastair does a great job explaining how this all works, and really cool acronyms like NACL, and is it NACL? Was that right?
It was NACL.
It was NACL. Okay. Watch that. And now we're going to do some hands-on learning on that. So Alastair, take it away.
All right. So what we're going to look at is basically navigating through different scenarios of using security groups to control network traffic flow. So the first thing is you normally want to get into your AWS infrastructure to manage something, and so we'll look at Internet to Bastion hosts. The Bastion host is that sometimes called jump host, first host that you manage in order to manage the remaining hosts inside the network. We'll then have a look at getting from that Bastion host to machines on our private network. If you watched the video where we talked about subnets and route tables, you saw that we couldn't get directly from the internet to a private subnet. That's the definition of a private subnet. So we'll look at using the Bastion host to get into that private subnet. And then in the previous video where I talked about the theory around security groups, I mentioned that members of the same security group can't necessarily talk to one another. So we'll also make a change to the security group to allow connectivity from one private host to another.
So lots to do here, yeah.
Plenty to do here. And if we're still feeling it, we will use a network access controllers to block some of that traffic at a subnet as well. So the first thing we've got is this. We have our network access control list that is set up as default. We have security groups on our web servers. Now the web server is the same web server we used in the last video. It's currently just running a very simple website. And we're going to enable remote management through the same machine. That's not a good practice. Don't use your web servers as a Bastion host. Have a dedicated Bastion host. And then we're going to have a look at a couple of machines sitting inside on our private network. The first thing we're going to do is connect from my laptop to the machine sitting in the public subnet. So let's take a look at the AWS console. And this web Bastion machine is the one sitting in the public subnet. We know that it's internet accessible because we have a public DNS IP address in there that we can connect to it from. So what I'm going to do to get connected into this first machine is I'm going to use the connect button and grab this example command line for connecting. And I'm going to copy that. And then I'm going to go into a terminal window. And I just remembered I need to change directories. In this folder, we have my PEM file. You can see it in the middle here. This is the one that contains my credentials for connecting. So I'm going to paste the command line that I took out of the console in, which calls to use that PEM file. And that should get me logged in to my EC2 instance. Well, actually, it won't, because the security group on that EC2 instance, and let's take a look at it, the security group on the EC2 instance at the moment only allows HTTP port 80 connections in. I haven't allowed SSH yet. So let's pop into that security group and add the SSH port 22. So this public HTTP is the current security group. Public web, sorry, that's the one for this VPC. And I can edit the inbound rules here to add a rule that allows SSH. And I'm going to allow that from anywhere. Simple rule, allows HTTPS access to EC2 instances that are in the security group. So if I go back now and have a look at my EC2 instance, web Bastion, and have a look at the inbound rules, it's now got that port 22 access for SSH.
That's what we're seeing on the bottom right-hand corner?
Yeah, this view inbound rules link here on the security groups is a really quick way to see what's being allowed in and out of your EC2 instance by the security groups.
Okay.
And it pops up both the inbound and the outbound rule. Remember, the outbound rule for security groups is wide open by default. All outbound connections are allowed. So if we pop back now into my terminal window, my SSH connection has said, hey, there's something responding now. Would you like to log into it? And so I say, yes, we're now logged into that EC2 instance that is my web server.
Nice.
So Yeah, Jeffrey?
Well, it was nice because you don't have to do it all over again. It just kept pinging it until it was ready, and then set.
Yeah, it will time out after a period of time, the SSH connection, but sometimes you're quick enough to realize why your SSH hasn't connected and to make that change. And we can see here the private IP address on our EC2 instance. It, of course, doesn't know its public address because that lives on the internet gateway. So we have now successfully made that connection from our laptop, from somewhere on the internet, into this EC2 instance. We've been able to do that by opening up that security group. Right, so we're now logged into our web and Bastion host. Next thing that we want to do is connect from that web host to our private machine. So this is a machine sitting inside the private subnet, which has no internet access directly into it. And we're going to go and hit this machine here called file, and that sits on our private subnet. We can see down here that the IP address is quite different. It's a 1064.5 rather than a 1064.1, and we can see no public IP addresses, so we know we've got no access from the internet. We do have a security group on here called private SSH, and we can see in there the inbound rules allow TCP/22, but only from this particular security group here. So we can see the source on this is a security group. And so the security group that ends in AC08 is allowed access in using TCP port 22 for SSH. So this is the linking of one security group to another. So let's go take a look for a security group that is called AC08. I'm going to go down over here on the left to this new security group section. One of the fun things about working with AWS is that you get new user interface changes all of the time.
Yeah.
So here's that security group that ends AC08. It's called public web. And then if we, again, push things up a little bit so they're a little more visible, we can see the inbound rules on here. This is the security group that I just changed to allow myself to SSH into that Bastion host. And so every EC2 instance that has the security group attached is now allowed to SSH into the machines that are in that private SSH security groups.
That's automatic. It does. Is there a way to say no, or?
So that's what I explicitly allowed in here on. Let me move these things around so we can see the right part. But I explicitly allowed it on here. So this private SSH security group explicitly says members of the security group, which is our public web security group, are allowed to SSH in.
Okay.
What that should mean is that I can SSH from this web server to the file server. Oh, I need my link for it, don't I? I need back in here, mail server. Let's go to the file server then, shall we? Hit the connect button up here to give me the shortcut. Here's the information I need to make that SSH with that PEM file. I've already copied that PEM file into my Bastion host, so I can actually use this command line as it is. And so I paste that into here. Get my pointer in the right place. And now I have moved on to the file machine. You see down here, it's now called file. And if I go ifconfig, we can see that I'm now on 10.64.5.101.
Okay.
I've gone from the Bastion host, which was on the 10.64.1 network, to that file host. So that's good. That's allowed me to then get from the internet to a machine that was internet accessible, and from that to a machine that was not internet accessible. This is how you do most remote management for your EC2 instances.
Okay.
Works very similarly if they're Windows machines and we're using RDP connections. So popping back into PowerPoint, that's going from the web server to the file server successfully. The next thing we want to look at is going from the file server to the mail server. And this is illustrating the fact that a security group that allows SSH from one source, in this case that public security group, doesn't allow from a different source. So we've got both the file and mail servers, and if we look at them back in here, the file server is a member of the private SSH security group, and the mail server is also a member of private SSH. But I'm not able to SSH. I keep going to the wrong place. I need the shortcut. I'm not able to go directly from the mail file server to the mail server. So here's the SSH requirement to get from, or to get to the mail server. I'll copy that. Now I'll pop back to that console.
It seems
this is currently.
It seems like everything that you need, long form commands, you'll be able to copy and paste from somewhere.
I really like that connect shortcut, that connect information is right there in the AWS console. It doesn't work like this on Windows though.
Oh, okay. It
behaves beautifully on Mac because Mac is Unix based. And so SSH is actually a command line operation in here. This is a little more complicated to do with Windows machines where you're usually using PuTTY to do the SSH connections. It doesn't work quite the same.
Okay.
So yeah, the convenience is great, but it's mostly there because I'm using Linux and Mac OS.
Okay.
So if I try and SSH from the file server to the mail server, and so we then can attempt to connect to the mail server, but again, because that security group only allows access from members of the public web security group, we're not getting a connection in. So let's pop in back into that security group private SSH and go and edit him. So in private SSH, we want to edit our inbound rules, and let's add another source in here, sg-private SSH. So that is allowing SSH connections from itself as well as from the public web. Save that rule. Let's see if we were quick enough for our SSH connection in that terminal to come up. That one hasn't come up, so we'll just break out of that and start it again. And straight away, we're talking to the mail server. We can say, yes, I'd like to keep that thumbprint, and now we're logged into mail.
Nice.
Right, just because the two EC2 instances had the same security group attached, that didn't allow traffic between them. Right? That's why you've got to think of it as the EC2 instances have the security group attached rather than they're members of the security group.
Okay.
Right? They don't actually have a direct relationship to one another.
Okay.
So, what have we done? We've come from the internet to the web server, and that was allowed through one security group. We've then gone from the web server to the file server. That required a change to another security group, and then moved from the file server to the mail server to show that we still need rules to allow access within the security group. Let's see if we can break this with a network access control list then.
Okay.
Network access control lists haven't come across into the EC2 because they're not something that's attached to an EC2 instance. So we're going to need to go to the VPC console to see the network access control lists. And then in here, we have a list of network access control lists. And what we'll see is that there is a default network access control list associated with two subnets. Here it is. Let's bring those up a little more into the center of the screen. And we can see that there is an implicit deny at the bottom, but the default is to have an explicit allow of all traffic. And this is true for both the inbound rules and the outbound rules.
Okay.
Essentially, network access control lists by default are turned off. So let's create a new network access control list. Let's call it NACL private, and we'll associate it with the pizza VPC because it's lunchtime here in New Zealand, and so I feel like pizza.
Nice.
Now I've got a network access control list. It's not associated with any subnets, and it has just the default rule that blocks everything. Well, let's associate that with a subnet. Let's associate it in particular with our private subnet, which is the /22 subnet. Boom, that's associated. All right, so now we've got a subnet associated with that private NACL, and that private NACL blocks all incoming traffic and all outgoing traffic. What do you think that's done in our console here, in our terminal session, where we connected into the mail server? Well, funnily enough, it's completely hung it. The actual session, the bit that's broken is the connection from our Bastion host, which lives in the public subnet, to the file host that lives in the private subnet. That's what we've broken with the network access control list that denies all traffic into that private subnet. Right, the break is at the boundary of a subnet. Maybe we should enable that traffic back again, shall we?
Sounds good. Sounds like a plan.
Okay, so let's change the inbound rules. We'll add a rule, rule number 99, just for fun. Custom TCP rule. Does it let me put SSH in there? It doesn't. TCP protocol, and on port range, just port 22. I'm just going to allow all SSH, and let's allow that into the subnet from just our VPC. You remember our VPC had a CIDR range of 10.64.0.0.16. So this allows SSH into the private subnet from anywhere inside our VPC. Only it doesn't allow traffic back out again, and that's why we need our outbound rules.
Okay.
We need to also have a rule, and let's stick with 99 as well, and that's got to allow traffic from 102.5 to 65.535. Right, this is the high port ranges that are used for returns. I'm again going to specify a subnet. Now, normally when you're using network access control lists, you are doing high security things. So the idea of having a destination of everywhere is not usually compatible with high security. So we'll change that rule. So we're now allowing TCP connections inbound on SSH port 22 and allowing the return back out again. Let's see if that has restored our SSH connection to the file server. So we are now able to talk again to the mail server via the file server from the Bastion host. So that network access control list, when we added one with no blanket allow, stopped the SSH connection. And then when we allowed just a limited connection in, we got our connectivity back again. Nice to see that the software-defined networking immediately applies those policy changes. There's no waiting for them to propagate. It's milliseconds to seconds from making a change to the change being applied in production.
Yeah.
Well, I think that has covered what we wanted to see in the demos with the firewalls. We've certainly shown the ability to use the network access controllers to control flow into a VPC and between groups of EC2 instances in the VPC. And we've just seen using a network access control list to restrict traffic in and out of subnets, allowing us to control at different levels. But all of this is setting policies for the VPCs, for the software-defined networking. Jeffrey, did it seem significantly more complicated as we went through that example?
No, not really. It was just a lot of steps that are involved to go back and forth and opening and closing. And I suppose that's a good thing, because if you need to close some, if you set up a new mail server, or if you set up a new file server, you can set that up and they'll have access immediately.
Yeah, the rapid changes is a nice feature in here. And I think one of the things you hit on was having lots of places to set things. And that is absolutely a characteristic we see in AWS. Even in a really simple environment, we're seeing lists of things. If we look at the security groups on this VPC, or the two VPCs that I've got here, we've got, 6 security groups already. And we've only got 3 EC2 instances in here. So you can see an expectation that there's going to be quite a lot of objects in here, and that's really usual in AWS. There are lots of objects. And so having names on things so you can understand what they are becomes really important.
Okay.
Well, that's what I wanted to show for VPC networking, in particular firewalls. And stay tuned for more coverage of VPC networking. I want to look at more complicated environments where we have VPC networking across multiple availability zones and what that is. So stay tuned for episode 3, where we start looking at some of the constructs you need to work across multiple availability zones and get redundancy in your environment.
All right. Well, thank you, Alastair, and thank you guys for tuning in for this. If you have any questions, ask them below. And of course, you can also tweet us in with questions, and we'll try and answer them on future episodes as we go, or answer them to you if it's more specific to something that you've experienced. So, but definitely go ahead, subscribe, and check everything out there, and we'll go from there. If you have an idea of something that you want us to take a look at, also let us know. And if we don't know it, we'll get a subject matter expert in here to do so. So, Alastair, once again, you're above me now. Alastair, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeffrey, and we'll see you for another episode.
Okay, take care.